He knelt in a tiny room, prepared one final bowl of tea for his closest students, and wrote a poem before taking his own life. The most powerful man in Japan had ordered his death, but even now, no one agrees on why.
A tea master held more influence than most generals in Japan. Then the man who gave him that power ordered him to die and never explained why. What could turn absolute trust into a death sentence?
Senno Rikyu was born in 1522 in Sakai, a wealthy merchant port city south of Kyoto that prized commerce over pedigree. In that world, tea was not simply a drink. It was theater, diplomacy, and status rolled into a single ritual. Rikyu trained for decades under tea masters who treated the ceremony as a discipline as demanding as swordsmanship. By the time he reached his 50s, he was widely regarded as the greatest tea master Japan had ever produced, a reputation built entirely without a single battle won. Rikyu's genius was not decoration. It was subtraction. Where earlier tea masters had prized rare Chinese porcelain and gilded utensils, Rikyu built his ideal tea room, the size of a peasant's hut, lit by a single window, using a roughly glazed bowl a farmer might have owned. He called this beauty Wabi, the elegance found in imperfection, poverty, and silence. Every gathering, he insisted, should be treated as though it would never happen again. One time, one meeting. Ichigo, Ichie.
When Oda Nobunaga rose to power, he understood something most warlords missed. Tea ceremony had become political currency. Owning a famous tea utensil, or being invited to a gathering hosted by the right master, signaled status as clearly as territory or army size. Rikyu became Nobunaga's tea master, and after Nobunaga's death at Honnoji, he simply continued in the same role for the man who inherited his power, Toyotomi Hideyoshi.
In 1587, Hideyoshi staged the largest tea gathering Japan had ever seen, the Grand Kitano Tea Ceremony, open for 10 days to anyone who wished to attend, samurai and commoner alike. Rikyu organized it. He decided who sat where, whose utensils were displayed, whose reputation rose, and whose quietly did not. For one extraordinary autumn, the most powerful man in Japan and the humblest tea master in Japan stood in the world of Chanoyu, almost as equals.
Hideyoshi loved gold. He commissioned an entire portable tea room built from it, walls, ceiling, utensils, all gleaming, and had it carried from castle to dazzle guests and rivals alike. To him, tea ceremony was another stage for demonstrating power, no different from an army on parade. Rikyu attended these golden gatherings and performed his duties flawlessly. He never once said what he actually thought of them. What Rikyu believed, he expressed instead through his own tea rooms. Spaces so small, two men could barely sit facing each other. Walls of bare clay, a single flower
in an unglazed vase. He was not simply serving a different aesthetic. He was making an argument that true refinement had nothing to do with how much gold a man could display. It was a quiet argument, but the most powerful man in Japan was listening.
By 1590, Rikyu's influence had become impossible to ignore. Daimyo seeking an audience with Hideyoshi often went through Rikyu first. Access to tea became access to power. And Rikyu, a merchant's son with no army, no castle, no official rank, sat at the center of it. Some of Hideyoshi's advisors had started to ask a dangerous question. Whose court was this really becoming? In early 1591, the accusation surfaced. A wooden statue of Rikyu, commissioned for a Kyoto temple gate, stood directly above the path Hideyoshi would walk beneath on his way in. Meaning, technically, the ruler of Japan would pass under the image of his own tea master's feet. Hideyoshi declared it an act of monstrous disrespect. Rikyu was stripped of his position and ordered into exile at Sakai, the city of his birth. Exile should have been the end of it. Instead, weeks later, Hideyoshi summoned Rikyu back to Kyoto and ordered him to take his own life. Rikyu did not protest, did not beg for explanation, did not apologize for a crime he may not have believed he'd committed. He simply accepted the order with the same composure he brought to every tea gathering he had ever hosted.
The night before his death, Rikyu held one final tea ceremony for a handful of his closest disciples. He moved through the ritual exactly as he always had, measured, unhurried, precise, as if the room held nothing more urgent than the taste of the tea. Before dawn, he wrote a death poem. Then he prepared for seppuku, the way he had spent his life preparing tea, without a single wasted motion. On the 28th day of the second month, 1591, Rikyu died by his own hand in Kyoto. He was 69 years old. The man who had spent his life teaching that a single gathering should be treasured as though it would never come again, had, in the end, only one final ceremony left to give, and he gave it to himself. Hideyoshi ordered Rikyu's severed head displayed at the Ichijo Modoribashi Bridge, placed deliberately atop the very wooden statue that had supposedly caused such offense. It was a final, calculated cruelty. The image that had once stood above Hideyoshi's head now stood beneath Rikyu's own. Whatever the true reason for the execution, Hideyoshi wanted everyone in Kyoto to understand exactly who still held the power. Historians still cannot agree on why. The statue may have been only a pretext. Rikyu was also accused of inflating the prices of tea utensils he sold, enriching himself through his position. Others point to simple rivalry. A man with no army had become too influential for a ruler who trusted almost no one. A persistent legend claims Hideyoshi tried to take Rikyu's daughter as a concubine and was refused. No single account has ever been proven.
underneath every theory sits the same tension. Hideyoshi built his identity from gold, spectacle, and total control. Rikyu built his from restraint, imperfection, and the belief that meaning could not be purchased. Two men who needed each other, one for legitimacy, one for protection, until the values underneath that partnership finally came into open conflict.
Rikyu's death did not end what he had built. His descendants and disciples carried his teachings forward into what became the great schools of Japanese tea ceremony: Omote-senke, Ura-senke, and Mushakuji-senke, all tracing their lineage directly back to the tea room of a merchant's son from Sakai. Those schools are still teaching wabi-cha today, more than 4 centuries later.
Hideyoshi's empire did not survive nearly as long. Within a generation, the Toyotomi clan he had built his golden tea room to celebrate was destroyed at the siege of Osaka, its heirs hunted down, its name erased from power. The bowl of imperfect clay outlasted the walls of gold.
Sen no Rikyu never commanded a single soldier. He never conquered a province. And yet, centuries after Hideyoshi's power turned to ash, people around the world still sit in tiny rooms, in silence, treating a single bowl of tea as though it will never happen again. That, in the end, may have been the only victory that mattered. Next time on Samurai Chronicles, a young samurai kills a rival in a fit of rage right in front of his lord and is cast out in disgrace. Somehow, that same exile claws his way back to become the second most powerful man in Japan. How does a killer become a kingmaker? Coming next. If the fall of Sen no Rikyu moved you, subscribe to Samurai Chronicles. New episodes every day. Not every battle in Japan's history was fought with a sword.